My name is Jaye Harrill. I work at QuantStamp. We're a bunch of auditors. And I've been in the space a long time. I care a lot about blockchain. I care a lot about stateless or statefulness futures, so we'll see. And today's panel is called Data is the Foundation for Dapps. And so we're just going to go down and introduce everyone.
Testing, okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Olshansky. I'm a protocol specialist at Pokt Network. I primarily focus on our consensus algorithm. And what we do is we're a decentralized, multi-chain RPC layer. So in short, what that really means is there's a lot of node infrastructure companies out there. What we do at Pokt Network is we are a protocol that incentivizes everybody else to be a node infrastructure provider of their own, depending on which blockchains you choose to support.
I'm Josh Neuroth. I lead product at a protocol called Ankr. We started off as a centralized service provider for Web3 nodes. Recently have transitioned to a decentralized protocol very similar to Pokt. We not only offer the RPC layer, we also have liquid staking products. And we have about 60,000 ETH staked on our product right now, and we're one of the validators on BNB chain as well.
Hi, I'm Pranay Valson. I'm a senior engineer at Covalent. And Covalent, we are the decentralized API for data across all on-chain for EVM and non-EVM. Happy to be here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Albert. I go by that guy in tech in the metaverse. At Alchemy, I'm a developer advocate at Alchemy, so I focus on content, community, and conferences. And at Alchemy, our goal is to bring the power of blockchain to 1 billion people. And the way we see that happening is a kind of cycle of life of product development. You have users, but in order to get users, you need to have really good products. And in order to have really good products, you need to have really good data and infrastructure. And so at Alchemy, we're trying to provide that data and infrastructure so that engineers, builders can come into the space and have all the tools that they need to build the really great products for users. So really excited to be here with this panel.
Okay, so an underlying pain point developers have is that dApps need index data to develop complex queries so they can create robust user experience in a trust-minimized way. What are examples of UX benefits that users would see and experience with this data?
So I think so if you're not familiar with how the blockchain works, basically you have validators and you have full nodes, and there's something called archive mode, which is a complete historical copy from the first block all the way to the latest block. And so that's usually known as on-chain data. And we have a lot of services that are working on caching data. Maybe Covalent could tell us a little bit about some of the index, but a lot of people also just pull that data directly off the archive nodes.
Yeah, so at Covalent, we have this philosophy that it's all on-chain data, it's public, and it belongs in the public space. And so what we're working on is a framework to be able to take this data and give it back. And so providing the tools to be able to extract this data by patching the nodes at the very source. And what we call this is a unified data export for all on-chain data that basically unifies the schema of on-chain data and then makes it accessible through a unified API. And so this unification across all EVM and non-EVM is what we are striving for, and the schema is what basically does the trick. So we are like all behind on this.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. When it comes to indexing data, I spent a lot of years working in the machine learning ops space. And when you index data, it really depends on the use case of that specific application. So at Pokt Network, we're essentially a proxy RPC layer for any other full node or archival node that you might need. But depending on the needs of your application, you may need to index it in some specific way or load it, what's called ETL. You extract it, transform it, and load it in some specific mechanism and schema that's needed for your app. If it's very standard, there could be potentially already a service provider that pre-indexed it for you the way you need it. It makes things very easy. It makes it very easy to bootstrap. But then you are obviously losing some trustlessness and some permissionless because you're putting trust of indexing on someone else. So there's a lot of different angles, and really depending on what your latency is, how much resources do you have to really pull all the data yourself and index it yourself on your local database. It really is a spectrum rather than just one solution.
Yeah. One thing we've seen at Ankr is there's many different protocols and Dapps that are pulling in all this archive data, and we've just needed insanely good hardware to support the archive. So we've built a custom bare metal server that we put all over the world. We got like 30 terabytes of NVMe storage on each server. We get crazy good performance on that. So I think we're not using like the cloud providers to do that. We're literally customizing the hardware to kind of fit these use cases.
So if you look at the sort of data warehousing stack, you have the nodes at the bottom layer. Then you have the nodes that create the data and extract it. So we call this the ingester. And then on top of this is the actual API that is able to serve those requests. And you can perform optimizations at any point in the stack. Obviously, it makes sense to optimize the DB for as many calls as possible, because at the end of the day, it's the data that you're providing. And at Covalent, we thought of this in a different way compared to traditional sort of ETL pipelines, which is extract, transform, load. We do an extract, load, transform. So we load all the data on-chain directly as much as possible with high fidelity and transform it on runtime. So we don't have to worry about the extra cost of transforming it for separate use cases separately. Yep. We just have everything on-chain all at the same time.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm going to put this question to Albert. With how fast the space moves, Dapps developers want to be able to go to market very quickly. How does each of your projects how does your project address this challenge?
So the challenge of trying to go to market quickly is the question?
Yeah, so Dapps developers want to go to market very quickly.
Yeah.
So how do they address this?
Definitely, that's a great question. So when Alchemy started in 2017, one of the biggest problems in the landscape was, by talking to hundreds of developers out there who are trying to make something useful with this technology, there was really a lack of tooling, a lack of ability to read and write from the blockchain. And so Alchemy decided, the founders originally wanted to create this kind of like, decentralized network. Everybody can provide this type of service. But what developers really needed, and what they were telling the company, is that they wanted a scalable, reliable, and data consistent way to interact with blockchains. And so that was really the first thing that Alchemy had started building. It's called Supernode, and it provides all of those qualities, and people have really enjoyed that service. And then once that started working really well, then we realized, okay, there's all of these different forms of data that people might want to use. And so we started building enhanced APIs. These are higher level abstractions. For example, one that came out recently is the NFT API. So if you're a developer and you want to make a gallery, a marketplace, a wallet, whatever it is, normally you would have to, without Supernode infrastructure, without these APIs, spin up your own node, wait for the blockchain to sync. That could take days. It's really annoying. And then after that, you have to read all the data about the NFTs that you want to show, index it yourself. That's also really annoying. And so by having these APIs, you can actually go to market really fast, because it's as simple as switching out your RPC link to connect to the blockchain, and then querying an API endpoint to get the NFT data that you need. So the number one thing that drives us, and I think all of us probably, is just moving the space forward as fast as we can, and that requires having really good tooling. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about node infrastructure and spectrum of decentralization, how do we mitigate the risk for developers and consequently users of their dApps if they're relying heavily on certain entity for blockchain data?
So the question is for blockchain data specifically, or?
So I think the question is more about the abstraction layer.
Okay, so what I think is, at the moment, not to go into meme land, but it is still early in the sense that there aren't really any super mission critical applications built on the blockchain. My insurance, my identity, I can go outside, and even if there's a chain halt, my life still goes on. Maybe at some point in the future where my car might not start, for example, if there's a chain halt, or if the data integrity of a certain piece of data that's necessary for the ignition to go on is quite critical. That's where the risk really starts kicking in. So today, I completely agree. The tooling, we just all need to move as fast as possible, enable developers as fast as possible. But when we get to the point where our livelihood or really like mission critical data is dependent on the blockchain, then there's a risk will come in, and that's when we're gonna really need to approach true full decentralization, and which will put the onus on the developer to start putting more effort and thought on indexing indexing things using their own infrastructure.
Yeah, so one of the things I've seen, I agree, like we're still pretty early on in the space, but we've seen incredible growth in emerging markets like Brazil, Nigeria, and Argentina in particular. We served like 1 billion requests from Argentina the last 30 days, and the Argentinian peso is down like 20%. So I feel like we're seeing DeFi as being adopted as critical banking infrastructure, right? And that requires like on-chain data, right? And so I just think that's incredible, and I think on-chain data is going to be very, very important for enabling this future where DeFi becomes a financial system for the rest of the world.
So certain use cases have more data demands than others, and we've started to see like the marketplace demands, the demands coming in from like DeFi exchanges, and also just doing like forensic analysis on this data, having extreme good use cases at Covalent. And we've been growing like crazily over the last year with like more than 500 Dapps doing all of these cases. And because we are use case agnostic, we start to keep a tab on what's happening in that space. And because progressive decentralization is the way to go for this kind of data, there should be no central point of failure. So it's really important that the nodes that are able to extract this data and be able to index it and further able to provide these sort of queries at runtime is something that the developers can themselves run on their sort of infrastructure. It has to be optimized to that level, but maybe not for like bigger chains which hold like maybe 2 terabytes and more of data. So it's also about like node optimization as much as it is about storage and query optimization.
Yeah, and another thing we've seen too at Ankr is that a lot of projects aren't using just like one node as a service provider, they're using multiple. So we see some of our customers are also using Pokt, some of them are also using Alchemy. They're kind of comparing and constantly testing the results back and forth. I think that's ultimately good for the space, right? We don't want to be relying on one single point of failure.
Totally.
Okay, so what type of challenges do y'all see from each of your perspectives in a multi-chain world?
The recent hack, for example?
I can answer that. So one of the challenges we just did is at Ankr, we contributed to the Aragon node client, and we ported that over and enabled it for Binance Smart Chain. And so as you guys know, with Ethereum, there's several different node clients. There's Aragon, there's Nethermind, there's Geth. A lot of the emerging multi-chain space just has Geth right now. And so I think like one area of opportunity for our space is to continue innovate on the node clients, to bring more node clients to other chains, because that will ultimately help the diversification of the network and the decentralization of each one of these other multi-chains.
So one of the things that I think will be a really big challenge in the future is right now when we talk about bridging, basically just bridging assets from one chain to another, that's already a huge undertaking with a lot of risk that involves a multi-sig and potentially a little bit of centralization. When we take it to the next level, and imagine, again, I used to work in virtual reality and autonomous vehicles, so a lot of image data that really requires a lot of processing. When we get to the point when we go, let's say, just past DeFi or just past assets, but we actually need to do cross-chain image data, for example, that is going to be a challenge that I haven't even started thinking about too much yet, because the amount of indexing we need to do, the amount of processing we need to do, schema interoperability is just going to be very complex. But when we do get there, I think it'll be a very exciting step for the whole ecosystem.
We think multi-chain is the future. There's no way to avoid it. But multi-chain is also one of the major sources or attack vectors for data corruption and data duplication and just wrong data. And so you need to have really effective protocols, messaging protocols underneath on the networking layer that are able to bridge these multiple chains. And we're working with Nomad XYZ to try and understand how we can do this best so that everything that's created on one chain is not duplicated, but you have verifiability at the end of the day. So the verifiability is the key aspect for multi-chain. And as long as you have a protocol that enables that, you're good to go.
Alchemy really wants to basically support wherever developers are, so I definitely believe in a multi-chain future as well. So wherever people are building, we should be able to provide the on-ramps and the off-ramps for people to get involved. Me personally, I think bridging is going to be a big topic that we are exploring. Also from the end user perspective, wallets. So for bridging, it's really important that all the data that's being captured across all these different chains can talk to each other, can interact with each other. But also as the user, I don't want to have to think about which network I'm always connecting to, and do I have my assets here or over there? And if I'm having an identity that's being built up on one chain, can I port that over across all the other chains? I think that's one of the promises that we've had, where it's like, you know, we have this blockchain, this public ledger, everything's going to be open and public, but now over time, we might have fragmentation because of all these different use cases for different blockchains. So how can we make sure that we also unify that, you know, in the future?
If you think of proliferation as multi-chain, then think of consolidation as a messaging layer between them that unifies the data, so there's no corruption.
Okay, so what do each of you think are the most pressing issues to solve in terms of blockchain data or the availability of data?
I think decentralization in the infrastructure layer is so important, right? We're seeing a lot of centralized service providers kind of come out. I think I personally have talked to some of the largest cloud providers who all have a Web3 strategy right now. And I think it's important for specifically around the community to be involved in governance of the infrastructure layer, and really be involved in kind of like how these platforms are governed and progress. And so that's something we're focused on at Ankr, is really enabling that, because infrastructure feeds the rest of all the applications and the DApps and all that.
Yeah, I would also say that kind of with great power comes, or with great ownership comes great responsibility. so one of the big things about blockchain and decentralized world is that users will get to take control back of their data, right? And what does it really mean? It means you get to monetize your data. It means you get to decide who has, whether you want the data to be confidential or anonymous or something else. But that doesn't come easy. So as a very basic example, most of you may be using a password manager of some sort. It's taken me a very long time to get my parents to use a password manager, as easy as it is. So when all of us control all of our data, that is a lot of mental effort on a day-to-day basis. So I don't know if we'll ever reach the point where all of our data is fully decentralized, maybe in a couple hundred years, but that's way far into the future. But I think one of the biggest challenges isn't going to be just making it accessible to developers, but primarily educating the users that they're in control and how much effort they actually have to put into controlling it and deciding who has access to what parts of it and in what fashion.
I agree to a lot of the points that Daniel made here. I think teaching developers how to use the API and how to use the queries is really important, because it's billions of rows and it puts a lot of infrastructure pressure for every query. So optimized queries are the way to go. The other thing that I think is important is not having personally identifiable information or personal sensitive information on chain, and making sure that if it's being accessed, that there's an obfuscation layer for this, some sort of privacy layer for any such data that might be accidentally put on chain, because these are sensitive details and they have real world consequences. So yeah, security and privacy along with the education, I think is really critically important.
Speaking of data and education, I remember this funny story of one of my friends. He was doing like a thesis project as an art major, but he wanted to do like a technical like website kind of a thing. And what he explored was he made a website where you could trade your personal information for like game points on the website. And he just wanted to see how willing are people to like just give up their personal information for this made up point system. And a lot of people actually interacted with this site, to get the points. So I think there definitely is a role for all of us to play in educating the developers who are gaining access to this data and then creating products to make sure that they know how to behave with it ethically, but also for the users to know, like, here's what you're trading when you sign a message or potentially reveal some information about yourself. It's going on chain, it's going to be there forever. How can you manage all of that? So yeah, that's something I care about a lot.
Don't paste your private key on chain.
Okay, so what does the future look like? Scaling. I mean, we're seeing tons more Dapps. Like there's 15,000 people here. What does it look like? Where are we going?
Okay, so to touch back on some of the topics I was talking about earlier, that everyone is going to need to index and process their own data based on their own app's needs. I think where the future is going is all node infrastructure is going to eventually become truly trustless and permissionless, and whatever RPC request that you make to get data for your DApp is going to be, you can count on its data integrity, but to some degree you're going to have to pull all of it locally, or whatever subset of on-chain data you'll need locally, and then manage it yourself. So I can see a lot of developers becoming more experienced at doing customized indexing or customized processing, because there's a lot of cool projects out there like homomorphic encryption, where you can do, let's say you can do multi-party compute, never have access to the data, but that can only go so far, and only when the use case and the data is very well known ahead of time. So over time, I think all developers will be taught to customize it themselves.
Yeah, so I think one of the big issues is that when you build DApps and you're pulling a lot of data at scale, it can get very expensive, especially on centralized platforms. And so we've seen, platforms that have paid enormous amounts to centralized service providers that have wanted to move over to a decentralized system just because it's cheaper, and the more the community is involved in that. And I think that's going to be a really important thing as we've seen traffic explode, that DApps and different protocols are looking at different options for that.
The verification aspect is critical. As we progressively decentralize, we find that more and more sources are available, but is there a way to verify whether those sources are true or whether they're playing with each other to like obfuscate the data? That's a certain possibility. So there needs to be mechanisms that we employ within the network or within the node infrastructure layer, in the distributed set of nodes, that we are able to find whether any sort of malaction has been performed by any node operator, right? And so this verification process has to be really well done. And we are using like a delegated proof of stake with like a distributed set of validators to do this. And the continuation of the chain requires that every piece of data that's created on chain and then parsed is verified before it's like ready for query, and this should be critical.
So how about data that's not created on chain? Again, let's say we go get our driving license at some state, right? Are we just gonna always trust the DMV of our local DMV that this is it, and they submit it on chain? Like, who's gonna verify it?
I think that's why decentralization is important, right? We need people in the community like checking other things. We need different service or different node providers adding this data, and the community needs to understand this and see these tools. Like the community shouldn't just be like trusting one centralized service provider for all this data. Like there needs to be like the community involved in governance and checking things and checking that there's not malicious nodes on the platform, or maybe the RPC provider is doing front running, or there's so many issues that can come up through the centralization. So I think it's time we've kind of scaled to a point where we have so much more traffic. Like Ankr saw 20x growth in 2021 on our RPC endpoints, which is incredible. A lot from emerging markets, and that like Pokt said, there's a lot of responsibility with that.
Oracles. Oracles are the way to go. Like, has as many oracles as possible, with the different coordination mechanisms between oracles to make sure that each of them have the right data. And because oracles get off-chain data on-chain, it's really important that, like, for example, if they're making commits, that there's a second party that's verifying them. So trust but verify for off-chain data, and have oracles that are trustworthy and, you know, like, they're up and running.
I just want to add a point. Like, I think Vitalik recently wrote a piece about soul-bound tokens, and this is kind of a different perspective here, where it's like more about individual identity and reputation on chain. There's this interesting use case of NFTs where if you make it such that the NFT can't actually be traded once it's in that person's wallet, you can actually imagine using these NFTs over time to kind of track off-chain contributions, work that you've done. So maybe the DMV will actually, you know, adopt some kind of these types of non-transferable NFTs, and they'll give you, you know, your, I guess, license, and then they, as an institution that the community hopefully verifies and says, hey, we do trust the DMV, they can give a stamp and say, yes, this is a real driver's license that this person has. So I think stuff like that is really interesting. And then also with regards to the original question of like the challenges of scaling when it comes to like a lot of data being accumulated, one of the things that I've found really pleasant as a developer is having the ability to actually get notified when something happens on the blockchain without me having to like pull for it or watch for it all the time. And so one of my favorite features that I've used at Alchemy is the Alchemy Notify webhook system. So you can basically put in like a wallet address, and then we'll let you know whenever any activity happens, and you can filter by certain types of activity. And then also like gas price notifications, things like that. So I think features like that will also be really important for developers and users as the amount of data scales. We need to be able to get to the data that we need really fast.
So we got 3 minutes left. So who has the oldest nodes, and whose data is it? The oldest archive nodes.
Ethereum?
Who has the oldest archival
Who
node?
has the oldest archive nodes?
In terms of a node provider or
Infura?
the chain?
Who can provide the oldest analytics for state history?
Pocket network.
State changes, that is.
I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I think we have nodes that have been running since like 2017, but I'm sure they, you know, that, I don't know. They all had all the blocks.
The computer on which the Genesis block was mined, whoever's that is, Satoshi.
Yeah, I don't think we have a node from like, you know, 2015 that's running right now.
Well, yeah, so at Pocket Network, we don't know who has the oldest node. It's fully decentralized. We don't run our own nodes. So someone out there is running Pocket validators, or is running Ethereum archival nodes, or just Ethereum nodes behind their Pocket nodes. So it's really up to us. It's up to the community, kind of true progressive decentralization to let us, basically what it does, it lets us decide in a decentralized manner what the oldest node should really be.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer to the original question is, but another favorite thing that another good thing that I enjoy about Alchemy is that in our free tier, you have access to archive nodes. So, you know, if you wanted to explore for yourself, you totally can. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at time. Thank you, everyone. So this has been a chat about data is the foundation for Dapps, and we're all at ETH Denver on Saturday night.